Welcome to Colorado State University's new podcast, The Audit, where host Stacy Nick talks with CSU faculty about topics ranging from their latest research to current events.
The iconic Pueblo chili is having kind of a moment right now. Beloved for its meaty texture and, of course, its fiery heat, you can find the pepper in everything from salsas and hot sauce to beer and fudge. But if it hadn't been for an inherited seed stock and a little luck, Pueblo's most famous chili variety might have been lost forever. Today, I'm speaking with Michael Bartolo, a senior research scientist emeritus at CSU's Arkansas Valley Research Center, and the innovator behind one of Pueblo's hottest crops. So, I want to start with the story of how you got into the Pueblo chili business. It sounds like we have you and your uncle to thank for it, what we now know as the Pueblo chili.
The production of chilies was a long progression of multi-generations contributing to the development of the Pueblo chili, and that certainly was the case in the Pueblo area. The Pueblo chili came into the area in the early 1900s as a landrace form that we historically called the mirasol. Mirasol meaning looking at the sun type chili. So that was the kind of the historical landrace of chili that had been grown in there for many, many years. And many of the families that farmed in that area, many of them immigrated from Italy, produced that, including my family. And so they produced that year after year after year and began selecting and saving their own seed. And over generations, they actually developed their own landrace of this Pueblo Mirasol chili. Now, really what started this other kind of side shoot is that I was away at college in 1988, and that's when my uncle passed away, but I was still going to graduate school at the University of Minnesota. It just so happened when I graduated, and then I happened to start in my new position right here with Colorado State University in 1991. So it just so happened I ended up working at the Arkansas Valley Research Center here in Rocky Ford, which is only about 50 miles away from where I grew up. When I came here, my dad had then gave me a bag of seed that my uncle had grown. It was stored in his garage. And he said, well, here's some extra seed. You know, you're the horticulturalist here. You can have it. And I had no idea. I had no plans. I had no aspirations to be a pepper breeder, but I had some extra room in a test plot the following year, and I began growing it out. So I grew out 4 rows of that chili and, looked pretty typical to what it usually was. But in that population, I was able to find one particular plant that kind of caught my attention. And I began saving that seed from that first section after, I think it took me 7 or 8 years of doing what we call single plant selections from that original plant. I got something that was pretty stable and pretty unique. And so from there, then I began bulking up the seed. We released it and gave it out to growers, and it kind of took off from there. So it's a lot of fortunate things coming into play. A lot of that, I'm not sure how much skill it is, but it's a lot of fortunate things that I happened to be all in the same area and inherited that seed, and all that came together to really produce what we now know as the one of the main varieties of Pueblo chili, which is now called Moscow, named after my uncle.
What do you think it is that makes the Pueblo chili so special?
There's a lot of things, and you could start off with kind of these things that you can visualize. Things like it's got great flavor. It's got a very thick wall to it, meaning it typically used from a culinary perspective, it's roasted. And when it's roasted, you want that to have a real thick wall, a real meaty texture to it because it holds up to that roasting process. So it's got that. It's pretty pungent, meaning it's got a pretty high heat content. And people that like to consume a lot of chili seem to prefer that. And so those two things from a horticultural standpoint make it important. But I think there's other things that we just hard to put your finger on what makes it so important. And I think part of it is that chili in general, and particularly this Pueblo chili, throughout the generations, even before we developed this Moscow variety, was really woven into the tapestry of the cultures here in southern Colorado, and particularly in the Pueblo area. So there's so many ethnic cultures that incorporate the chili into the foods they eat, and so many of the traditions that we share and value here in this part of the state. So that was woven into it. And so it's got some of these other characteristics that are really hard to describe, but for the most part, they've become part of our culture rather than just a thing to provide calories. It's really part of our identity, and I think that's what makes it so special.
You mentioned kind of that heat element earlier. How hot is the Pueblo chili on the Scoville scale? Hotter than maybe that other chili down the road that we won't mention by name?
So that it's okay to mention Hatch chili. They grow a very fine chili down there. Everybody asks me to try to compare them, but a typical Hatch chili, there's a lot of variability amongst chilies, and it really encompasses a wide range. But generally, the Pueblo chili is about 5,000 Scoville units. And so just for more of a reference, obviously a bell pepper has 0. Your typical New Mexico Hatch Anaheim type chili has about 1,500, maybe 2,000 Scoville units. So it's considerably hotter, but less hot than, say, for a jalapeno or some of these cayenne type peppers.
And the Moscow it's a publicly released variety, is that correct?
Correct. So that was released out to the public in the early part of the 2000s, around 2002, and we just generally released it. It's an open pollinated variety, and decided at that time just to get it out to the public. And I believe in that kind of thing from Colorado State University's perspective, is that this is a variety, it's really not widely grown like some of the other crops that we produce. It's a pretty niche crop. And so I think really to live out that land grant mission, we felt it was best to get that out to the public and really help increase some of the economic impact into the local economy.
Now, you're still working on the chili, right? The Moscow of today is not exactly the Moscow of 10, 20 years ago.
To me, it's like this long progression. It'll never be finished. There's always new things that I'm looking for, characteristics and trait in chili pepper. So technically, I retired in December of 2021, but I have an agreement with Colorado State University that I'm going to continue to work on the chili peppers, and I continue to do that. And we're always looking for a better improvement. So there's always some horticultural trait or some characteristic that we look for. Some of the things I'm looking for, again, is that wall thickness, a bigger fruit size, earlier maturity, and flavor. We want to make sure we retain that characteristic flavor. That's part of our heritage, is to have that full-bodied flavors. And then we're also looking for a wider range of pungency, so it'll satisfy everybody. So I've got lines that are relatively mild, almost no heat at all, to ones that are maybe 2 or 3 times hotter than that original Pueblo chili. And believe it or not, those hotter lines, like I said, people that consume big quantities of chili really like it hot.
I've heard that you actually don't like spicy things. Is that true?
That is true. I don't eat very much. My expertise, people always ask me, what's your favorite salsa or the way to eat it? And my expertise, as far as the culinary aspects of it, fall off a very steep cliff right after the pepper is picked off the plant. So what I look for is somewhat hard to describe, because I'm looking at so many factors when I'm selecting some of these, and I'm looking for how the plant stands up, the architecture of the plant. And when I feel it, the pod, I want to make sure it has a density to it. And so there's things I wish I could describe it to you in details, and if I really thought about it, I probably could. But when I'm out there, I know what I like, and I know what I like to select for. I'll go through hundreds and hundreds of plants in a particular year looking for that, because I always feel like there's always like a hidden gem out there. And you find a plant, and if you find a plant that has a unique characteristic, I'll save the seed from that and see if it'll come true to form next year. The basic things are looking for a good plant architecture, nice pod size, good yield, but ultimately it's got to come down to flavor.
So then how do you test the flavor? How do you have some taste testers that you employ? And if so, how do I get on that list to be one?
So I do a little tasting myself. So I kind of avoid the heat of it, because I just bite the very tip of it. So a lot of the capsaicin, or that chemical causing compound that causes the heat sensation, is located more toward the top end of the pepper. So if you just bite the tip, you don't get used to that. But I've thought about this immensely, about how to get a good taste testing. And, typically you'd employ a taste panel, and usually of college students. Not that I think they're bad, but I don't think they would necessarily have the experience. So I've got some good friends here, and some of them have been growing chili. Some of these, a couple of ladies that I work with have known for years. One of them is 86 years old. She's a wonderful, beautiful lady. Just she knows more about chili. She's been cooking and preparing chili all of her life. She grew up raising chili and picking it. And so what I do is I usually give her those chilies, and I just says, what do you think of that? How does it roast? She knows what it takes to prepare a wonderful meal, because she's, thousands of meals for her family over these decades that she's done it. So I rely on people like that have not only an understanding of the physical attributes of the chili, but some of those intangible things that we talked about. How does it prepare and how does it add flavor to a particular dish?
It seems like the Pueblo chili has really brought a lot of attention to the area. There's the festival, the fun feud with, again, that other chili down the road. It's become a really popular vegetable. Is it a vegetable? Is it a fruit? It has seeds.
It's a the pod itself is technically from a botanical perspective is a fruit, but we call it a vegetable because that's the kind of the way it's used in culinary aspects is as a vegetable. But it certainly has increased in popularity a lot, and a lot of that can be attributed to some of the work that the Pueblo Chamber of Commerce has done. There was a man who was the director of the Pueblo Chamber of Commerce named Rod Slyhoff, who was a big cheerleader for that. I remember getting together with him now almost 30 years ago, and we sat down on ways we can promote the Pueblo chili. And that was when we kind of had that brainstorming session to come up with the Chili and Frijoles Festival. In those early years, it was a very, very modest gathering, but he really ran with that over the many decades, and he really should be championed as the father of that festival. And that festival has drawn a lot of attention, a lot of people to Pueblo, and really amplified it beyond the borders of Pueblo County, all up and down the Front Range. From that, it's been a catalyst for a lot of other entrepreneurial ventures as far as adding it to other types of food.
I wondered, it seems like also culturally it's become such a staple. It's really become this identifier for the area almost.
And that's true. Like I said, it's woven into so many of our good memories. Even me, now my background is of Italian descent. So typically you don't associate hot chili peppers with that kind of culture, but that's what's so unique about the Pueblo area is that, really that is a community that is consisting of immigrants from all over the world. And so chili was the one thing that was woven, the thread that kind of bound all those different cultures together. So you can imagine about all these different cultures that are coming to work in the area, whether it be for mining or farming. A big employer at that time was the steel mill, of course. And so that drew a lot of people from all over the world. But chili was kind of the common denominator, and it really became part of the binder to that community. And we can all share wonderful experiences. I remember even as a child myself, how that was incorporated into our food and how, it was so important to our family gatherings. It was always there.
Does having kind of a trendy crop kind of help Colorado agriculture in general? Does that kind of get more people to think about where their food comes from?
That's exactly right. And I think it's important that, we obviously have a lot of attention looking at things like the Palisade peaches, the Olathe sweet corn, the Rocky Ford melons, Pueblo chili. Those are all iconic crops, but they help raise the ship for a lot of our agricultural products. Colorado is really a livestock producing state. And a lot of the things that are very important maybe don't get all the attention that they deserve. Potatoes, wheat, all those things are very important crops. Some of these other crops get a lot of fanfare, but hopefully they help lift the boat for the entire agricultural industry.
Okay, so my last question, as the preeminent expert on Pueblo chilies, what's the best way to serve them? What is your favorite dish?
So I've gotten that question, and as I mentioned, my culinary expertise is very small. But to me, if you were to ask me what is the best way to eat them, it's the way I grew up eating them. When I remember my grandmother would make fresh Italian bread, and just having a roasted chili with a fresh piece of Italian bread was heaven. And that's what I think is really good about Pueblo chili is to have it in its purest form. So for me, it's with a fresh piece of Italian bread or a freshly made tortilla, and just the chili itself, just roasted, so you get that nice charred flavor on the background, and there's sweetness and there's spiciness all mixed in there. So to me, that's the true essence of eating a Pueblo chili.
Well, now I'm hungry, and I bet our listeners are too. So that's probably a great thing to end on. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for the opportunity, and I hope everyone gets a chance to eat some chili.
That was Michael Bartolo, a senior research scientist emeritus at CSU's Arkansas Valley Research Center. I'm your host, Stacy Nick, and this is Colorado State University's new podcast, The Audit, featuring conversations with CSU faculty on everything from research to current events.